nom de la console. Il faut voir la console.
Et qu'il augmente le son aussi.
Toi qui me le traduis, moi.
Annulé, stock. On a des news sur la... la marque. C'est marrant comme ils ont fait ça avec un... Il y aura plein d'autres... parler de la PS5.
Mais la qualité de son live, elle est dégueulasse. Hein, lui.
Tu ça pue la merde.
Parler un petit peu des buts que nous...
Bah, je sais pas, si c'est lui, je trouve que ça va. La qualité du gars.
Faut pas parler de la PS5.
C'est sa qualité, je suis sur le live de PlayStation en direct, genre c'est beaucoup mieux. Sa qualité est puante.
Pas être créé jusqu'à...
Oh, s'il parle pas de la PS5, c'est de la merde. Hein.
Ouais, c'est la merde. Au début de la vidéo, il dit qu'il a annulé le ton, je sais pas quoi. Il va pas parler de la PS5 réellement, il va parler d'autre chose.
Oh, ça pue la merde.
Ouais.
Ouais, il faut qu'ils arrêtent, ils ont des mauvaises
Tu
discussions.
parles de quoi d'autre?
Là, il parle de PS3 là. PS4 là.
Ouais, mais c'est pour revenir sur quelque chose, écoute.
Ouais.
On vient de parler. On parlait de la PS3, hein. Réfléchis, c'est ce que tu dis. Franchement, on parle de la PS3. Ah ouais, il te dit qu'il savait pas créer des jeux.
Which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers
Ah, il a pété son bazar, il a 44 000.
and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future.
Et ben, le jour où t'as ça, mon vieux, je suis là dans le gameplay.
The game creators involves talking to well over 100 people. It's something like 24 publishers.
T'as personne?
Regarde.
Allez.
Incredibly valuable.
Ah, franchement bien, pas bon. Mais parle de la PlayStation 5!
On ne comprend pas l'anglais, donc
Ouais,
c'est même pas
bah,
expliqué
déjà
ici, quoi.
français, c'est très limité. Je rigole.
I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk.
Oh, il va parler de SSD seulement, ça pue la merde.
Mais ça, c'est
Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision.
Franchement, s'il présente pas, franchement, c'est de la merde.
S'il montre pas la console, c'est de la merde.
Ouais, franchement, j'aurais dû arrêter de parler tout le temps parler.
On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture.
Ah, mais le son de JHX il est trop fort, ferme ta gueule, baisse ton son, un connard JHX. Tu parles comme un pour dans le micro. Con, lui, mais un live c'est trop fort sa voix. Sa qualité est dégueulasse.
So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming language. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something...
Il n'y a même pas le logo de la console, ils ont mis PS5, ça pue la merde ça.
I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular, 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could So here again are the three principles. The first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the number one ask for developers.
Ça.
SSD, c'est que c'est déjà depuis des années sur
Ouais,
PC.
c'est ce que je vais dire, ça fait 10 ans qu'ils nous en parlent, ça. C'est comme leur Litera.
Ça fait des années que ça existe.
Sur Xbox, c'est pareil.
It was part of the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation.
J'ai envie qu'ils disent qu'on a besoin d'autant.
Positive impact.
Ça sera récompatible depuis la PlayStation 1.
Mais au début, j'ai compris, au moment où il a dit qu'il annulait le tour.
Ouais,
J'ai compris, quoi.
il parle encore de Nimo, quoi.
C'est encore de la merde. PlayStation, ils savent pas. Cette année, ils galèrent trop à parler, ceux-là. Ils abusent.
And a lot of developer time was being spent designing around.
Comment ils arrivent pas à placer leurs mots, ils savent rien faire. Leur communication, elle pue
Ah,
la
je sais
mort.
pas, je comprends pas, franchement.
Elle pue la mort, leur communication. On est fin mars.
Ah, c'est vrai, ouais, mais on est en mois d'avril quasi, quoi, tu vois, vraiment, quoi, et on a toujours pas vraiment une image, un truc, quoi, tu vois, l'autre, il a déjà tout dévoilé, quoi. Il y a un système de merde, moi. Non, je valide pas du tout.
Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disc and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about 1/4 of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude, meaning very roughly 100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel is so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game...
Ah, c'est des merdes, ouais, PlayStation.
Clairement.
Ah ouais, il chie dessus là.
Franchement, non, mais qu'est-ce qui me parle, là, putain, franchement. Ils ont déjà tout.
I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory. Which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, But still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second
Regarde une conférence sur le disque dur, les gars.
loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that
J'ai regardé une conférence sur le disque dur.
Ouais, en tout cas, vraiment, PlayStation, il va falloir qu'ils revoient leur communication parce qu'elle est éclatée.
If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster.
Ouais, ils font de la merde, PlayStation.
Which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and then on the hard drive many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them, which means no installs as you know them today. There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory.
Oh, il m'emmerde, franchement, PlayStation, il m'emmerde.
On PlayStation 4,
Ouais, ça parle trop pour
game
rien.
data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use.
Après, il va t'expliquer le bouton, la manette PS5. On a amélioré le bouton, à moins de latence.
So system memory
Ouais, mais il est en train d'expliquer sans expliquer, tu vois.
30 seconds or so of gameplay.
C'est ça que j'aime pas, tu vois.
A lot of the 8
Tu dis
gigabytes
pas, là, la console, elle sera composée de ça, ça. Bon, on le sait, quoi. Tu vois, SSD, aussi qu'elle sera plus puissante, que le temps de chargement est plus rapide. En fait, il nous résume ce qu'on sait déjà.
supposed to be with more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have
Là,
lots of
je sais pas.
data
Au début, je comprenais PlayStation, maintenant, je commence à moins comprendre.
A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So, back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second. No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. Finally, those patch installs go away. The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably...
C'est impressionnant, hein, putain.
If that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not
Waouh, je suis vraiment
Il
impressionné.
a atteint là-bas.
faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single
Oh, mais Carole, ferme ta gueule, putain. Qu'est-ce qu'elle a
and there are
supportable,
a lot of them.
Ouais, ouais.
Let's look at check-in.
Et Carole, elle est vraiment insupportable, cette meuf.
Attends, quoi, ils vont montrer à PS5.
C'est quoi,
60 000.
Ouais, ils sont pas prêts de la monter au rythme où ils avancent, là. On la verra dans 6
Ah,
ans.
moi, j'imagine pas le jour. Écoute, il est. Non, mais moi, il a 50 000 euros. C'est une vidéo de merde. Il va monter, lui.
Quelle vidéo de merde.
C'est-à-dire que je le suis depuis ses 10 000 abonnés.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD. So to solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our
Ouais.
station. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation.
Et moi j'ai dit heureusement qu'ils ont mis info public.
For example, there are
Parce que là le vrai il serait vraiment pas hypé, hein. Il se rentrait pas. Oh putain.
the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded.
Mais il y a longtemps qu'on a plus une ratale conférence, hein, les gars.
On one side,
La seule qui a été ratale et qui n'a pas été ratale pour moi, c'est celle de Nintendo avec le Breath of the Wild 2, quand ils ont montré la paix. Ça a donné une hype de fou. Et le pire, c'est qu'il est toujours pas sorti le jeu.
12-channel interface.
Ouais.
8 channels wouldn't be
Ouais, c'est ça, quoi. Il est toujours pas, tu vois, donc c'est vraiment pour hyper pour rien,
It's
quoi.
actually 5.5 gigabytes. The 12-channel the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come
Et aussi, allez, franchement, PlayStation, tu viens avec PC, tu présentes de la marque Sony, non?
C'est Sony,
Ouais.
Sony Vaio.
Oh, mais...
C'est un
Tu
marque.
vois plus le Vaio que le Sony. Hein.
Non, mais leur marque, c'est ça, c'est Sony Vaio.
Ça dérive, ah, c'est
C'est
le
leur
Vaio.
marque chez eux. C'est comme leur téléphone, c'est Sony Xperia. Tu vois?
Ouais, c'est vrai.
And whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to
Ouais, bon.
establish that the friction
Voilà.
caused by reinstalls or redownloads
Avec une tablette Microsoft.
and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment.
Faire vraiment quand même.
Back to the flash controller.
Un moment ou
On
un
the
autre, on
other
aime.
side, it connects to our
Ouais,
main
parce
custom chip via 4
fait, hein,
lanes
ça,
of
je-
Gen
ok,
4
mais-
PCIe. And
À un moment, un
inside
petit
the main
raccourci.
custom chip is a pretty hefty unit
Je
dedicated
pense que
to
ça
I/O.
durera quasiment une.
Before we talk about what that does, let's
Une
talk
heure
about
pour cette
compression.
merde. Non.
PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 27th
Mais Lionel, tu peux dire tout ce que tu veux, mais tu vois, dans ce Sony Vaio, le operating system, c'est un Microsoft.
It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken
En plus,
had
Max, tu
always
vois
been
celui-là
out
qui
for
parle.
years, but it was already becoming a de facto industry
Je suis
standard.
sûr à
Half
100%,
of the
c'est un
teams
putain
I
de
talked to
PD.
were either using it
Ça
or
se
getting
voit.
ready to evaluate
C'est vrai qu'il pue le PD.
C'est vrai, écoute, c'est ce que je lui ai vu quand j'ai vu le gars, je dis c'est ça qui représente Sony, c'est un PD.
Ouais, c'est un
Et toi tu
PD,
sur
je te
ça,
dis.
c'est trop fort.
La vue de ma mère, c'est un PD. Ça se voit trop, mon vieux. Avec sa voix.
that typically becomes
Un
En plus,
PD.
sans mytho, on voit même que lui ça me fait chier de parler, il reste monotone, il y a rien, tu vois, de...
Mais c'est vrai, il doit pas. C'est ce que.
Ouais, ça fait chier de parler de ça. Moi je comprends même pas comment il parle de ça, moi.
Il doit parler de ça, et le pire de tout, à personne. À une caméra. Waouh!
Bah, il y a côté, il y a son prompteur.
Dans 2 secondes, ici, c'est une bite.
There's a lot more.
Bientôt, tu vas voir Albert 2 arriver.
Including a dedicated DMA controller, the game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming
Là
off
où
of
est-ce
the
qu'il veut
SSD.
envoyer.
This equates to another Zen 2 core.
Allez, les gens!
Moi ce qui me fait rire, c'est qu'il fait une conférence comme ça. Or les 3/4 des joueurs, ils ont 16 ans, ils savent que dalle, ils mettent le CD dedans, ils jouent.
And a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware.
Montre-moi la console, fils de pute.
One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is
Ah ouais,
responsible.
bon bah le coup, là.
I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers.
Sur ce jeu, je joue, je m'en carre l'oignon.
Part of file I/O, and this
Moi ce que je veux dire, même le mec qui s'en bat les couilles de ce que c'est un disque dur ou quoi, il sait que le SSD c'est plus rapide. T'as pas besoin d'expliquer ce qu'il y a
Bah
dedans.
ouais, tout le monde.
Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is
Content
read
d'être là. Hein.
is an unattractive option. It could really
Ouais, je suis content.
Pas du tout assez
So
technique là.
we've implemented a gentler way where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the
Xbox soit 12 teraflops.
all of that surrounding hardware. Our 5.5 5
termes de
gigabytes a
teraflop
second really should translate into
supérieur
something 100 times faster I/O than PS4 and allow the dream of no load screen and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage
pas
to
de 1
whatever
Tera,
we put
8.
in the console. Now,
Oh
the
putain.
kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you
Oh, c'est
have
le clochard,
extensive
franchement.
PlayStation 5
Putain.
PlayStation avec Clodo.
compatibility with those games on PlayStation 5, then
2 teraflops pour moi, moi de
giga,
giga, attends.
leave your games on the hard drive and play them
En fait, il avait raison de parler de PS3.
Tu sais, y a pas de 500, hein. C'est un 825. On a dans le cul.
Il y a même pas d'intérêt en fait.
En fait,
pas
c'est un
500,
Tera, mais
pas
comme le
plus.
système l'a installé dessus, c'est 825.
Et le manette.
and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They
Attends,
connect to the
quand tu vas cliquer sur PlayStation 5, on serait merci de patienter.
Ouais.
full advantage of decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features
Ah.
I was talking about.
Ça sera plus rapide pour charger les jeux que la PS, que la Xbox. Ouais, je suis content, franchement, ça a tout changé.
Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC.
Non mais il en a pas mal son SSD de merde.
M2 drives used PCIe 3.0. And
Je sais même pas s'il y a dans ma PS4, je m'en bats le couille.
In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting our samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with any
Hey Max,
priority levels, definitely, but our
Comment?
custom IO
on avait tous les deux
are
tort, hein.
the
Tu te rappelles?
Ouais.
rather
Eh
than
Max,
M2
moi je te
drives.
jure, il y aura 500 gigas. Ah non, non, il n'y a pas 500, il n'y a pas un Tera,
Ouais.
il y a 825.
Non, mais j'ai raison, parce que je t'explique, ça n'existe pas des disques durs à 800 gigas.
Non, non, ça veut dire c'est un Tera, mais avec installé, quoi.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an M2 drive.
Et vu qu'un jeu fera 450 gigas,
Giant heat sinks. In fact, some
là tu peux en installer
Dès que
deux.
tu recevras ta console, tu pourras déjà changer le disque dur.
M2 drive samples and benchmarking in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for PlayStation 5 launch at year end, we'll also be doing
Ah, j'en reviens pas que le gars, il
to
est...
make sure that the
Putain.
architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high.
Et après, conférence Xbox, ça sera mieux.
Ouais, bah je te jure, je suis sûr, je vais regarder, je vais
Bah,
la regarder
Xbox,
sur deux.
lui,
Ah,
il va,
ça mieux.
il va me montrer quelque chose, parce que je me dis que si tu veux, il va
Ouais.
pas remontrer ce qu'il a déjà sorti, quoi.
Ah, ils vont me montrer, moi je regarde Xbox. Je regarde.
Ouais.
Ah ouais. Ah, ils ont même pas encore fini la console. Ah ouais. Tu la finiras après le coronavirus. Connard, hein.
Quasiment la moitié.
Putain, t'es content, genre t'as appris beaucoup de choses que tu voulais apprendre sur la PS5 aujourd'hui? Ah genre.
De quoi,
T'es
Lionel?
content, t'as appris beaucoup de nouveautés sur la PS5 là quand même, ouais.
Ouais, j'apprends que ça, moi.
Là, il y a un bon disque dur.
Ouais, au moins tu sais, genre elle est plus rapide pour charger les jeux que la Xbox, jamais.
Et il m'aurait dit que c'était moins rapide que la PS4, ça m'aurait choqué.
But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers
Teraflop
to
du côté
adopt.
de Xbox.
Now,
Même
backwards
entre 12
compatibility
là.
was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key
La
need
bande
throughout
passante
the
du disque
design
dur.
process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing.
Non, apparemment, t'as raison, Lionel. Ils avaient pas un disque dur d'un Tera. C'est un disque dur custom à 825 Go.
Ouais, y a
C'est ça,
pas d'intérêt.
Ils ont pas été.
Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear two
Tu m'as
points
fait
that
ça.
are quite confusing.
Oh, franchement, c'est violent.
First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is
Il y en a pas une qui est plus puissante que l'autre en fait. Ou la Xbox est plus puissante d'un côté, l'autre est moins puissante et ainsi de suite. Ils ont même pas réussi à faire une console plus puissante l'une ou l'autre. Quelle bande de cons. L'autre il met 12 teraflops mais il a une bonne passante, mon vieux, quel trou de balle. Et l'autre il met 10,28 de bande passante, de teraflops et ils arrivent à une meilleure bande passante sur la console.
Attends, j'aimerais bien voir le prix, moi. Quand ça va arriver.
C'est là que tu vois Xbox pour...
Tu réfléchis bien, quand 600 balles, voilà.
Attends, je sais pas comment ils
Moi, je vois
travaillent
pas
leurs
plus ça,
matériaux.
ils vont pas avancer,
Non, mais-
ils vendront pas.
Je sais pas comment ils travaillent leurs matériaux parce que si
Tu vois
Xbox ils
combien
arrivent à
Moi,
faire
600.
12 teraflops,
Et toi?
un max.
Moi, je pense à c'est 500, moi.
C'est ça?
500.
Ouais, moi aussi, 500, 550.
Moi, je dis 500.
Max,
Moi,
je
600
sais pas
grand
comment...
max.
Max, je sais
Xbox,
pas comment ils
c'est
travaillent
ça.
leurs matériaux. Hein.
Xbox a annoncé que ce sera le même prix que le PlayStation.
Oh, bon, 500 balles.
Mais de toute façon, ils peuvent attendre Xbox parce que Xbox, PlayStation, ils attendent Xbox avant de donner leur prix. Donc ils peuvent attendre Xbox. Xbox et PlayStation sont pas prêts de parler, ils ont tout le temps, ils s'en battent les couilles. Ils vont attendre qu'Xbox dise tout tranquillement, on va se faire eux. Mais Max, en tout cas, Xbox, ils travaillent mal leurs matériaux. Hein. Ah, Max?
Bah ouais.
Parce que Xbox, ils ont 12 teraflops, ils arrivent à tirer une moins bonne bande passante que PlayStation avec 10,28 teraflops. Ils travaillent comme des cons hein, chez Xbox, franchement.
Ah bah attends, quand tu mettras un jeu, je suis certain que le jeu sera plus beau chez Xbox que chez PlayStation.
Ouais, c'est normal, ça c'est sûr. Bah déjà maintenant, hein, avec la Xbox One X.
Bah c'est juste ces années-ci, hein. Parce que à partir de la PS3 et de la 3.6, la PS3 dominait.
Ouais. Ouais, mais maintenant la Xbox a déjà des meilleurs graphiques avec la X comparé à la Pro.
C'est ça. C'est sûr, ça.
Ça va pas changer grand chose quoi.
Déjà, la Xbox One X coûte déjà aussi plus cher, hein.
Ah, backward! On parle de la compatibilité.
Je me repasse la séquence. La rétrocompatibilité.
Ah, effectivement qu'on peut jouer à tous les jeux.
Mais pas PS4.
Elle dit que c'est compliqué.
Il dit que c'est compliqué.
Attends, écoute ta gueule.
The logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available.
Xbox, pour ça, c'est des tueurs.
One advantage of this strategy
C'est la programmation, hein, chez eux.
backwards compatibility is in the console. It's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove
PS4, c'est
backwards
bon.
compatibility.
Mais ils ont pas le même parcours aussi. Hein.
C'est certain.
Yeah.
L'autre, c'est informatique, l'autre.
Non, mais ce qui est pas c'est qu'il y a que Xbox et Xbox 360.
Roadmap advancement creates a potential
Donc il n'avait pas une grosse récompatibilité à faire. Hein.
Ah,
Donc c'est PlayStation 1, 2, 3. Maintenant tu veux la 4 en plus.
ah.
Donc t'as 4 consoles, 4 générations. À prendre en compte. L'autre il en a avec 2 quoi. Tu vois, donc et encore, il n'y avait pas tous les jeux.
Je suis juste la PS4 déjà, il arrivait déjà pas à faire des jeux PS3 quoi.
Non mais ça il l'avait annoncé, il l'avait dit.
Ouais, qu'il y arrivait pas, mais Xbox
Ouais,
il arrive, lui, il l'a fait des
Ouais, mais il a
Xbox
fait des
360.
jeux, il a pas fait tout, il s'était pas toujours le lendemain, c'est du
Non.
hein. Non, c'était
Bonne
un peu
année.
semaine par semaine et encore t'avais pas le jeu que tu voulais. Tu vois.
With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy
Mais c'est deux conceptions différentes.
require use of the new GPU capability. For more than a decade,
En tout cas, moi, si la PS5 est moins puissante et qu'elle est pas rétrocompatible de la PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4, la merde, mon vieux!
dedicated hardware is responsible.
Moi, je te le dis, moi. Il y a intérêt à être
Tu
rétrocompatible.
vois,
du
c'est
début.
ce qu'on attend de la console quoi, franchement.
That
Ouais,
means
ouais, pouvoir jouer à ton jeu PS1, ça serait une tuerie.
En fait, les seules évolutions qu'on va avoir, réellement,
graphique.
concrètement, c'est graphiquement et en rechargement. Le reste, tu l'as dans le cul. Oh, ça, c'est bon, là.
geometry engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called
Ça parlait des ombres dans le jeu.
allow the game to
Ça va synthétiser les ombres.
geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability.
Eh, tu crois quand j'achète un jeu, je me commence à me dire, est-ce que ça va synthétiser les ombres à la seconde
Ouais.
PS4?
Il faut, parce que Bran, apparemment, il arrive à me capter avec les ondes dans le jeu.
J'achète le jeu, il se lance, c'est bon! Le ray tracing.
Another major
Contre un jeu, là, putain. Au moins un jeu, voir les graphismes.
GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as
Ça
any
PD.
Je vous rappelle que les gens qui sont là sont...
The CUs
Max,
contain new specialized
à PD, hein, ce gars-là, quand même, t'es d'accord avec moi, hein.
which can calculate the intersection.
Je suis pas
Il va
fou.
t'enculer, Ken, tu vas kiffer.
Non, mais je suis pas fou, Max, hein.
En plein live, tu vas voir, tu vas avoir une hausse de viewers.
Max, je suis pas fou, ouais, il est un peu. De la jaquette. Ah, Max, il est de la jaquette, ah ouais.
Variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free.
Ah, tu as la PS4, ça, pour
Having
mon
said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray
Tu vas pouvoir jouer à Fortnite sur ta PS5.
Ouah, je suis content.
But
Oh.
it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take
Yeah,
less
okay.
than 9 rays a second to on audio.
IRM.
Audio occlusion and some reverb
Quoi?
information. With
Ouais.
more of the GPU
Mon frère, toujours pas faire d'over.
Ouais.
Having said that, adding ray traced shadows and reflections
Le propos, hein, c'est que si souffrait même demain, on l'aurait pas.
hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can
C'est
we
ça
go?
qui est le pire.
I'm starting to get quite bullish.
La nouvelle console, elle est là, il God of War et tout, et...
2000 est sorti.
Hein?
2000 est sorti.
Ouais, ça cartonne, ça cartonne. On est sur l'activité, quoi.
Another set of issues for the GPU.
Là, il sort dans quelques jours, mais tu peux déjà le chercher aujourd'hui chez
How
Smartize.
big do we make the GPU
Jusqu'à midi.
and what frequency do we run it at?
C'est ça.
This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why.
Non, mais lui, je veux le claquer sa mère, je crois, à parler comme ça, il m'emmerde.
Possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably
Oh, raconte pas
different
ta vie avec
because
tes teraflops.
teraflops is
Putain,
defined as the
merde. J'aurais pu jouer à Fortnite.
capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU.
La conférence Xbox, à quelle heure?
20h, mais je vais la regarder, elle sera mieux.
All run faster when the GPU frequency is
Celui
higher.
qui nous dit la PS5.
At 33%
Par
higher
contre, pour en
frequency,
parler correctement,
rasterization goes
Elle appelle ça, elle est bonne, gros.
the L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth.
Elle était bonne, là, ça.
About the only downside
À
to
mort.
system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a
Mais
rising
j'espère pour eux, parce que sinon, une faire de jeu PS5 sur PS5.
to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done.
M'emmerde.
Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply
Eh,
about
franchement, elle
power.
pue la merde.
It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution
Il va pas de la
that we
montrer,
think
c'est mort,
will
hein,
be
il va pas de la
quiet
montrer,
at
c'est
that
mort.
power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly.
ça va faire du bruit ou pas?
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they?
La PS4
If we plan
normale
to
aussi.
maintain
Xbox fait pas de bruit.
6-bit instruction usage,
Ouais.
we need to set the CPU clock substantially
Elles ont
lower
dû baisser la
and
vitesse.
noticeably increase the size of the power supply.
Oh putain, Xbox fait pas de bruit, ça a plus puissance.
So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So, if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is
Oh,
a
la PS5,
fairly
mon vieux, va tout
sizable
avion.
GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and
T'inquiète.
CPU are performing,
Quand tu vas allumer la PS5 chez toi, il y a tout le monde qui sait que t'en auras une.
which makes everything deterministic. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.2%, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches.
M'emmerde.
But now we can
Ouais,
run it
travers.
at that frequency. In fact, it spends most
Ça
of
va
its
être travers.
time at that frequency. That doesn't mean
Tout
all
m'emmerde
games
avec
will
ces
be
teraflops,
running
ces
at
gigabytes,
2.23
ces SSD de
gigahertz
merde.
and
Bon, la
3.5
console, là, date de
gigahertz.
sortie, le
When
prix,
that
c'est bon.
worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding new dreams. It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us
Ce
to
soir,
the
Matt Xbox parle de son disque dur aussi.
As players,
Les
we
12
experience the game
teraflops.
through the visuals,
Alors,
On a la console la plus puissante de l'univers.
such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important.
Et
but
nous vendons à
impact
perte
of
pour
audio is huge.
battre la PlayStation.
At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core.
À cause du coronavirus, Ubisoft ils ont mis un message comme quoi tout ce qui devait arriver sur Rainbow Six ne pourra peut-être pas arriver à temps. Ils doivent travailler chez eux.
But audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second.
Il faut sortir un agent
It's
anti-corona.
been tough going
Et
making
tu vas voir,
forward
mon
progress on audio.
Eh, les
on
rues elles sont
PlayStation 4.
désertes, ça.
Masque à gaz, mon
Et du
vieux.
il travaille au Maroc, à toute une société, il n'y a pas de coronavirus là-bas.
SPUs and Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take
Je crois qu'ils ont détecté des cas.
and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground.
Toi, t'es encore plus con, toi, arrête de dire la merde comme ça.
Attends, tu veux pourquoi quand ils ont sorti la Xbox, tu l'avais même pas vu?
This feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has
Ah non, on te l'a dit par après, c'est toi qui étais voir la vidéo.
Just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from. To the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you.
Ça trouve le jour où elle va sortir, tu la verras pas non plus.
To use Dead Space as an example, I know, old school. You're fighting enemies in fairly dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is the enemy is precisely there.
Non, on a créé un embout pour mettre sur le pénis.
So, how do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place?
Donnez.
Well,
Je suis encore depuis des années, je suis où est l'ennemi au moment où j'entends le bruit de pas. Il m'a 3-6.
Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes, based on direction and frequency, can be encoded in a table called the
De toute manière, la conférence, elle ne nous est pas adressée.
HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject.
Hier,
In the
Kevin,
course
il
of
est en train de
10
montrer
or
comment
20
tu fais
minutes,
quelqu'un.
we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive.
Kevin,
The simplest way
explique
to
un peu
use
à
an
tes 4
HRTF is
viewers ce
to
que t'es en train
process
de
a
voir.
sound source to make it appear
Ouais,
as if it's
de la
coming
bouffe.
from one of those 1,000
Non,
locations.
ça c'est.
inside.
Je t'ai pas demandé ce que tu voyais dans le miroir.
Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every time.
Tu vas quand même acheter.
That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the
Moi, je te
Tempest
dis,
engine.
retirer une vidéo au mois de juin.
GPU technology.
À la console, on la sort au mois de décembre.
Such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access is via DMA, just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU.
Voilà, sa femme, elle pourrait parler et dire quelque chose, tu vois.
The
Elle est
goal
tellement conne
being
qu'elle
to
sait pas
make
quoi dire pour
possible
te répondre à ses SMS.
100% utilization of the CU's vector units.
Et,
Where we ended up is a unit with
comprends,
roughly the same SIMD
complètement
power
hagards.
as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4
ça gueule.
combined.
Il a bien
If we
raison.
were to use
Je
the
comprends
same
que là non
algorithms
plus.
as PSVR,
Ouais.
that's enough for
C'est
something
là
like
que tu te dis, putain,
5,000 sound
le gars il
sources.
ferme sa
But
gueule,
of
on
course,
écoute une
we
vidéo
want
de
to
merde et
use
il a
more
49
complex
000 personnes qui le
algorithms, and we
suivent.
don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would
Tiens,
have
il faut
been
que tu t'apprennes à fermer
wonderful
ta
if a
gueule,
simpler
rappelle le
strategy,
vieux.
such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed soundbars or the like. Also, we wanted many
Mais y'a
hundreds
personne
of
dans la salle, le
sources
connard.
referring to that Atmos supports. And
Genre, il dit qu'il y a du monde.
Oh, putain, t'as pas entendu que c'était un faux public au tout début, gros.
Mais c'est un faux public! Oh,
Ils ont fait exprès, c'est un faux public, l'audio de faux
il
public.
y a du monde dans ça! Oh putain! Oh, t'es un tueur, toi!
On touche des... Tu
Ah
vois,
ouais, il y a du monde!
déjà que tu vois pas grand chose, mais là, maintenant, tu t'entends rien en plus de ça. Oh putain!
Now, 3D audio is a major
Il y a du
academic
monde.
research
Oh
topic.
putain, non mais il y a Corona,
No one in the
connard, ça a
world
été
knows all of
sur
it.
des conférences et
The
tout,
set
et
of
c'est pour ça que tu
algorithms that has to be
reportais.
invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000
Vas-y,
HRTF
explique-nous ce que tu
sound
vois.
locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be.
Il faudra faire tout ça avant de se connecter à Internet.
So we have to blend the HRTF
Juste ça, c'est la
data in the
description.
closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause.
Apparemment, tu vas devoir rentrer l'adresse email là, pour mettre ton compte et tout. Là, je sais pas si ça va être.
Ah voilà,
Meaning
on va
it
switcher
should
le
feel
micro.
as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual
Tu vas
processes
t'arrêter
and
tout du
3D
tout,
sound
parce
sources.
que moi,
But
je comprends rien, Charlie.
ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics
Ça
can
rigole,
sound
mais
like the
c'est joli,
spherical
hein.
harmonics used in computer graphics.
Et il faut combler
And
les trous.
finally,
Comment
there's
ça?
audio devices. The player might
Une
be
box,
using
une box.
headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different. That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year step.
Et t'as de l'audio, hein?
Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers,
Il y aura jamais un
and
autre créateur de
speakers, we're in
console
the
qui va mettre la
process of
vie.
implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual
je vais remplir le
surround sound has
sondage.
a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4-style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there? Like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence. Well, the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF is being used. It wasn't mine. It was the
4% passionnant, 3% bien, 4% pas mal, 2% bof, la cata 69%.
Total game playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user.
Merde!
That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward.
Encore mieux, la conférence de Kevin.
At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice
En live ce soir, après celle de Xbox. Il va nous présenter sa teub.
Non, mais il va bientôt nous présenter sa copine qui est sur internet. Sa copine l'a demandé.
Je vais vous montrer comment enculer le Corona.
Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play.
En plus, il a des dons et tout pour ce truc-là.
That gives you the highest score, meaning that it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years.
Tu vois, des 20 balles, tu vois là, j'ai un skin aujourd'hui.
Everyone
2
to
euros.
experience that next level of realism.
Ah, je sais que tu vas rien offrir, on le sait tous, Kevin.
A bit about our design and decision-making process today, and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Comment t'as
C'est fini.
Voilà, prochainement, quand ils reprendront la parole,
Elle y a cru. Attends, je remonte.
Ah chier.
Je remonte.
Ah chier.
On peut revenir ou pas? Oh, j'arrive pas.
Oh, ça a fait tout.
Bro, commencez à vous mobiliser. Thank you.